There's something about toxic relationships that goes far deeper than we often admit. It's not just the stress, it's not just the arguments, the manipulation, or the constant second guessing of yourself. No, the damage is far more profound. These relationships have a way of reaching into the very core of who you are, your soul, your spirit, and slowly wearing you down until you no longer recognize yourself. And the worst part, it often happens so subtly, so quietly, that you don't even see it until you're already deeply affected. You begin to compromise. At first, it's just little things, biting your tongue, making excuses, swallowing your discomfort. You tell yourself you're being patient, kind, mature, but as time goes on, that tolerance turns into numbness, and that numbness, it creeps into your spirit. You stop feeling joy the way you used to. You begin to carry a heaviness, even in moments that should be filled with peace. You're anxious in rooms where you should feel safe. You begin to question whether your voice matters, whether your boundaries matter, whether you matter. It's not just mental and emotional fatigue, it's spiritual erosion. Toxic people often operate in confusion. Their words twist things. One moment they lift you up and the next they tear you down. There is no consistency, no truth, no steady ground to stand on. And when you're exposed to that kind of instability long enough, your inner world starts to reflect it. Your thoughts get cloudy, your prayers get dry, your confidence in what God has spoken over you starts to dim under the noise of someone else's chaos. And if you're not careful, you begin to adapt to the dysfunction. You start believing that this is what love looks like, that walking on eggshells is just part of being close to people. You accept the idea that your value is tied to how much you can endure, how much you can take, how much you can give without ever being filled. But that is not love, that is bondage, that is not fruit-bearing friendship. That is a slow, spiritual death masked in false loyalty. God did not create you to be a dumping ground for someone else's unrepentant patterns. You weren't made to be a sponge for another person's sin, soaking up their damage while your soul decays. And let's be honest, sometimes we keep toxic people in our lives because we're afraid of being alone, afraid of guilt, afraid we'll be seen as selfish, but that fear becomes a chain, and those chains bind the spirit. Toxic relationships grieve the soul because they keep you from growing in the light. They cloud your discernment. They suffocate your joy. They whisper lies that directly oppose everything God says about you. And if you stay in that environment long enough, it begins to feel normal. But there is nothing normal about living drained, discouraged, and distant from who you were called to be. There's a kind of courage most people never talk about. It's not the kind you need to face a crowd or win a fight. It's the kind that creeps up in the quiet places, when no one is watching, when the stakes are personal, when the cost is hidden deep in your heart. It's the courage to walk away from what feels familiar, what feels easy, what once felt like love, and choose instead what is right. Because the truth is, righteousness is rarely comfortable. Choosing it often means standing alone. It means saying no when everyone else says yes. It means walking away when every part of you wants to stay. It's hard, it's painful, and it demands conviction, the kind that isn't shaken by emotion or pressure or even guilt. When you're dealing with toxic people, that choice becomes even more difficult. There are moments when it feels like staying is the noble thing. You convince yourself that if you just hold on longer, love harder, give more grace, they'll change. You believe that your endurance is a form of faithfulness, and maybe sometimes it is, but there's a line where staying stops being holy and starts becoming harmful, and crossing that line often feels more comfortable than drawing it. Comfort will tell you to avoid conflict. It'll whisper, keep the peace, don't rock the boat, it's not that bad. But righteousness will tell you to protect your heart, to guard your soul, to honor what is true, even if it means stepping away from what is familiar. And that's where courage is born, in the tension between what feels good and what is good. Conviction isn't about being stubborn. It's not about pride or proving a point. Conviction is rooted in truth. It says, I know who I am, I know what I've been called to, and I will not compromise that calling just to keep someone else comfortable. That kind of resolve doesn't come cheap. It costs. Sometimes it costs relationships you've had for years. Sometimes it costs your reputation. Sometimes it costs the comfort of not being misunderstood. But what it never costs is your peace with God. You cannot walk in freedom while clinging to chains. You cannot grow in grace while being surrounded by voices that mock the very truth that saved you. So there comes a time, and for some, that time is now, when you must look at the people in your life and ask, are they pushing me toward righteousness or pulling me away from it? If the answer is the latter, you need to find the courage to act. Not out of hate, not out of bitterness, but out of a holy fear, a reverence for what God has placed in you, and a refusal to let anyone damage it. Choosing righteousness is not about feeling strong. Most times it will feel like weakness. You will second, guess, you will grieve, and you will want to run back. But courage is not the absence of fear, it's obedience in the presence of it. Loving people does not mean allowing them to destroy you. It does not mean turning a blind eye to sin, to manipulation, to patterns of harm that go unchecked. And yet, for many of us, there's a deep confusion between what love actually is and what we've been told love should look like. We've been told that love is always gentle, always agreeable, always silent in the face of someone else's brokenness. But that's not love. That's fear wrapped in politeness. That's passivity dressed up as kindness. Real love, God's kind of love, is fierce. It is honest. It is rooted in truth. It does not celebrate what is wrong just to maintain peace. It does not shrink back just to keep a relationship alive. There is a line between compassion and compromise, and too many people cross it every day in the name of being loving. But love that enables sin is not love, it's permission, it's partnership in destruction. And there's nothing holy about that. Sometimes we think, if I just keep being patient, they'll change. And yes, patience is a fruit of the Spirit, but patience is not the same as silence. Patience is not watching someone ruin themselves and others while you say nothing, do nothing, and act like everything is fine. That's not love, that's enabling. That's giving someone space to continue in their sin while pretending it's grace. But grace always calls people higher. Grace always tells the truth. Grace never applauds destruction. Loving someone means wanting their ultimate good, not their temporary comfort. It means being willing to say hard things. It means setting boundaries that protect what is right, even if it makes you look cold or uncaring. It means walking away when someone refuses to turn from what is damaging, not just to you, but to their own soul. And yes, it hurts. It's hard to walk away from someone you love. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove yourself so they can finally feel the weight of their choices without your constant covering. There are people who will use your love as a shield. They'll keep doing what they're doing because they know you'll stay, because they know you'll clean up the mess, because they know your heart is too soft to let them face the consequences. And they'll call that loyalty, they'll call it love, but it's manipulation. And if you're not careful, your willingness to carry someone else's burden will become the very thing that keeps them from repentance. Love doesn't mean you agree with everything. It doesn't mean you accept everything. It means you care too much to pretend like everything is okay when it's not. It means you're not willing to let sin take over while you play the role of the supportive friend, the loyal sibling, the self-sacrificing partner. There's nothing loving about being a bystander to destruction, yours or theirs. There comes a point in every believer's life where the desire for holiness collides with the reality of relationships. Not everyone who walks with you is going where God is calling you, and while that truth might sound simple, living it out is anything but. Because the path of holiness will always, in some form, require separation, not because we're better than anyone, not because we stop caring, but because we begin to see that being near to God sometimes means walking away from what pulls us away from Him. We're not called to blend in. We're not called to tolerate everything just to keep people close. We're called to be set apart, and holiness, real biblical holiness, is not about outward appearances or performance. It's about the posture of your heart. It's about being clean before God. It's about walking in truth, living in obedience, and choosing purity over popularity, righteousness over routine, and faithfulness over comfort. But the hard part, sometimes the very people we love the most are the ones who hinder that walk. They distract us, they drain us, they normalize things we're trying to leave behind. And if we're honest, sometimes we keep them around not because they build us up, but because we're afraid of what life might look like without them. We hold on to the past. We hope they'll change. We don't want to feel like we're giving up on them. But holiness doesn't come without a cost. It will cost your pride. It will cost your comfort. And yes, it might even cost relationships. The Bible is full of examples where separation preceded deeper intimacy with God. Abraham had to leave his family. Moses had to leave the palace. Jesus himself often withdrew from the crowds, even from his own disciples, to be alone with the Father. And still, we try to convince ourselves that we can walk in step with God while holding hands with people who mock what he stands for. It doesn't work like that. Light and darkness don't mix. Sooner or later, something has to give. And this isn't about cutting people off in arrogance. It's about choosing what feeds your spirit instead of what starves it. It's about understanding that holiness isn't just a private pursuit. It affects every area of your life. Who you talk to, who you trust, who you give your time, your attention, your heart. If someone consistently pulls you back into gossip, bitterness, lust, anger, or apathy, you can't ignore that just because you love them. Love them, yes. Pray for them, hope for them, but don't compromise your walk just to keep them close. God doesn't call us to isolation, but he does call us to purity, and sometimes purity requires distance. Not out of hatred, not out of pride, but out of a deep desire to protect what God is building in us. Because if we're truly serious about becoming who he's called us to be, we have to be just as serious about what and who we allow to stay in our lives. There's a quiet war going on inside many hearts, a battle between the fear of man and the fear of God. Most people don't talk about it, but it's there, silently influencing every decision, every boundary, every moment of silence when we should have spoken, and every moment of compromise when we should have stood firm. The fear of man is subtle. It doesn't always show up as panic or trembling. It shows up as hesitation, as people pleasing, as shrinking down who you are so someone else doesn't feel uncomfortable. It shows up as holding back truth because you're afraid of being rejected, judged, or misunderstood. And this spirit has power. It will keep you in toxic relationships long after God told you to walk away. It will convince you that being accepted is more important than being obedient. It will make you choose peace with people over peace with God. It will tell you that your worth is tied to how well you're liked, how many people you keep happy, how few feathers you ruffle. And before you even realize it, you're living a life ruled by others, afraid to say no, afraid to speak truth, afraid to set boundaries because someone might get upset. But there comes a moment when you have to ask yourself, who do I fear more? Whose opinion shapes my choices? Whose voice carries the most weight in my heart? Because if you fear people more than God, you'll never walk in freedom. You'll always be swayed by emotions, by guilt, by manipulation, by approval. You'll live in cycles, apologizing for things you shouldn't be sorry for, tolerating things that grieve the spirit, and staying silent when God is calling you to speak. The fear of the Lord is not about being afraid of God like he's some distant tyrant. It's about reverence, it's about awe. It's about having such a deep awareness of his holiness, his justice, his authority, that it shapes how you live, what you say, who you trust, where you go, and yes, who you allow in your life. When that fear takes hold, it overrides the fear of man. You stop trying to be liked and start living to be faithful. You stop needing approval and start craving alignment with his will. Sometimes obeying God means disappointing people. Sometimes it means walking away from relationships that look perfectly fine on the outside but are rotting your spirit from the inside. Sometimes it means being misunderstood, accused of being unkind or too much or too harsh. but you weren't called to please everyone. You were called to be holy, you were called to stand firm, and that calling cannot be fulfilled if your heart is ruled by fear of man. We live in a world that praises acceptance, tolerance, and compromise, but God still calls his people to righteousness, to courage, to truth. And that means there will be moments where you must choose. Will I honor God, or will I make man comfortable? The one you fear most will always be the one you obey.